Hello and welcome back to my channel. Now in this video I want to take you through the basic steps of a panoramic photo or a sequential panoramic photo using the Canon R5 and the RF 15 to 35mm lens. Now you can actually use any kind of lens combination, but for this particular tutorial I'm shooting super wide at 15mm, so I'm getting the full kind of field of view that the lens is capable of doing. And quite often it actually produces some really nice results. So we're going to take a look and go through the basic workflow. So first of all, important to set correct white balance or consistent white balance, because you're going to be shooting sequential shots, sequential frames, so they need to look the same. So you need to set your white balance, really important. And I'm just going to adjust the settings. I don't need f11. I think maybe f8 is probably right for this scene. And I'm going to slow the shutter speed down to 1/30th of a second because it's quite low light. But this is being shot handheld. So I shoot sequentially and you can see some pretty nice results with a little bit of post-processing. Of course, this is something that can be done so quickly and easily with just an iPhone or any smartphone shot in panoramic mode. But of course, you're getting so much better quality by using a real camera with a full frame or even APS-C or even a micro four thirds sensor. You're going to get infinitely better quality. This is the reason for doing this tutorial, just to show you that the workflow is not as difficult and it's not as time consuming as you think. You can get some really good results by just taking a little bit of time to shoot with the camera in portrait mode and then doing some post-processing in either Lightroom or Camera RAW. This is Adobe Bridge, but you can use any software really, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to open these files in Camera RAW. For me, that's the quickest and simplest way of processing these files. It's also worth noting that these were shot in portrait mode and they were shot handheld. I don't really have time to carry a tripod. Quite often I'm shooting panoramics and I'm not really planning on doing that, so I'm not really going to be carrying a tripod and all this kind of bulky, heavy equipment, and also like panoramic tripod heads and stuff like that. I'm not likely to be carrying all that stuff around with me, so I do a really quick and simple sequential panoramic handheld with the stabilization turned on. So I select all the files and I go to open in Camera RAW. Then I select all the files again and I just do a quick auto just to have a look and see what the software will actually do, and then I can start to make some adjustments. Don't actually need to do that, so I'm just going to take auto off. So what I'm going to do now is go to merge to panorama. So that's right click, merge to panorama, and just let the software program load the files in, and you're left with this sort of panoramic merge preview window, which is pretty useful. And you got a few features here that you can start to change. So you generally have in the projection view spherical, cylindrical and perspective. Now I can start to make some kind of small edits here. I can use the boundary warp to change the level of distortion. Generally I like to leave it at like 100 because then I've got the full field of view. I'm using all the pixels that was generated. I can also change the image workflow by applying auto settings, which is kind of like the auto Camera RAW sort of color and contrast adjustments and things like that, and also apply the auto crop. I'm just going to leave it as it is, but I'm going to have a look at cylindrical and see what that gives us. Not really very happy with that. Perspective view generally sometimes doesn't work. It really does depend on the type of lens that you've used. I'm going to stick with spherical. I'm going to save that down, and then automatically opens in Camera RAW, which is pretty useful. So now I'm going to apply the crop, just going to straighten up the horizontals. It's probably a little bit wonky because that's the way it was shot originally. So the software is going to stitch together whatever you've produced in RAW. So it's down to you to use the crop and straighten tools just to straighten the image up a little bit. I'm just going to check the background over. I think it looks pretty good. It looks reasonably clean. I'm just checking for noise levels and things like that. Because the more you process your files, the more noise is going to be visible. So we're just going to try and keep that down to minimum. So now I'm just going to make some really simple, basic kind of edits here. So I'm just going to go to light. I'm going to adjust the blacks and adjust the white levels. Maybe just bring the shadows down a little bit. Just change the highlights. Maybe boost the exposure a little bit. Maybe alter the contrast. Let's go down to color and let's beef up the saturation. In effects panel, you have dehaze. But really the best thing about using Camera RAW and Lightroom is actually being able to apply masks. So I'm able to change the colors and the saturations in different parts of the image. So I'm just going to hit on background, and for some reason that's just highlighted pretty much the entire image apart from the water in the middle. I don't really want that, so I'm just going to change that. I'm going to take that mask off and I'm going to select sky, and that's done an amazing job. That really has. That's basically created a mask, and you can see how it's gone around all the branches and leaves of the trees. So now I'm able to alter the sky completely separately to the rest of the image, which is an amazing tool. I mean, if that wasn't available, that would take so long to create a mask to go around all the trees and leaves and things like that. So to be able to do that automatically is a real time saver. So now I'm just going to go in and just make some small edits to the sky. It's really easy to go over the top. You can see here with the temperature. I mean, you need to keep it looking natural. It's quite a dark and moody looking sky, but the more you add things like dehaze, it just starts to look really unnatural. And I see this a lot in some images, and I look at the way that people have edited their images and I just think, yeah, it's just way over the top. It's overblown. So the real trick is to keep your edits subtle, make small edits just to increase kind of contrast and maybe add a little bit of dehaze. But the great thing is that I can now control noise levels in different parts of the image. So here I'm just going to zoom in here and check the noise levels. So I'm just going to add a few more sort of small edits here to the saturation, beef up the saturation a little bit more. I think I'm kind of happy with that. So now I'm going to go back and select the background again. And as before, it's selected pretty much everything apart from the water feature in the middle, like the lake that's in the middle. So what I can do now, I can use the subtract tool, and I can use the brush to basically brush out parts of the image that I don't want to be affected with my next kind of edit. So I'm basically going to take out the sky. So all the mask that's in the sky, I'm going to remove, and also the trees. And let's see what that leaves us with. So it leaves us with the foreground elements, which is the area that I want to adjust in terms of like color, contrast, and saturation, all those things. So I just want to be able to manipulate the colors in the foreground area. So now I have a mask that's going to allow me to do that. So I'm just going to adjust the black levels, and we're going to adjust the whites, bring the shadows down so we can see a bit more detail, maybe adjust the highlights again, maybe adjust the contrast. I'm doing this really quickly, obviously, so I'd probably take a lot more time, and then adjust the saturation. Let's have a look at dehaze and also clarity. And again, clarity is one of those ones where it just completely over sharpens the image, and I see people do that quite a lot. They just ramp up the clarity and the dehaze, and images start to look really unnatural, overly sharpened, overly saturated, and it's not a style of photography that I particularly like. I like my images to look as natural and as normal as possible. So now I'm going to go back to the sky, and I'm going to make a few more adjustments to the sky just to kind of level out the colours in the whole scene. Now that I've made a few adjustments to the sort of lower foreground, I want to make some small adjustments to the sky just to make the image look as natural as possible. So actually reasonably happy with that. I'm now going to go to save. I'm going to save the image down as a JPEG into the original folder that I was working in, and you can see Camera RAW gives you various features here for saving your images down. So here's the final JPEG file, and I have to be honest, I think it's a reasonably decent effort. I mean, it was a really quick and simple process to capture the images using that kind of sequential panoramic technique. And I could do more editing if I wanted to. I could do more editing on the sky. I could replace the sky completely if I wanted to. I could do more work on the foreground, the trees, the bridge, the water in the middle part of the image. But I prefer my image to look as normal, natural as possible. I don't like to go over the top with the editing. I think that's a pretty decent effort using Camera RAW or Lightroom for a quick and simple and easy panoramic technique. So I'm just going to show you another really effective way of using that panoramic technique. Using real cameras, I use the Canon R series cameras, but you can use pretty much any camera to do this by moving the camera into portrait mode and taking sequential shots. This is the Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane, and this is where I usually shoot the men's A-League football. Every so often, I'm able to get up into the stand and take a nice kind of wide panoramic shot of the stadium. I normally do it pretty much every match, but I generally kind of move around and try and get different angles, different shots. So this is using the 15 to 35mm lens, extremely wide, but there are occasions where I feel like I just want to go a little bit wider, and that is when I use the panoramic technique, blending those sequential shots together to create a much bigger image in terms of pixels, but a much wider image as well. So this is an example of one of those kind of ultra-wide panoramic images created from sequential files. This is another example, and I'm standing in pretty much the same position where I was for a standard photo, but you can see how much wider I've managed to get. I've managed to get more of the seating in, I've managed to get more of the roof in, and this has been obviously edited as well, but generally it just feels like I've got more of the stadium in shot. And this is another example of this technique. This is Wembley Stadium. This is, I think it's a 90,000 seater stadium. So this stadium is absolutely huge, and you kind of appreciate the sheer size and scale of this stadium from this shot. This is probably about a couple of hours before kickoff, so the stadium does look kind of empty. And it's not perfect. There's a few issues in the corner where the images haven't quite stitched together properly, but you'll be forgiven for that. But the fact that I'm able to get most of the roof in and pretty much all the seating apart from what's behind me is really quite impressive. And it's one of the reasons why I like to use this technique, is being able to get as much of my surroundings in shot as possible, as opposed to just taking just a standard photo with that 15mm wide field of view. And here's another shot that I really love. This is the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London. Again, this is probably about an hour, maybe an hour and a half before kickoff. You can see the crowd gradually building up. It wasn't quite a sellout. It's about 45,000 people in a 60,000 seater stadium. So I think the upper tiers weren't being used, but still you really get the impression of the size and scale of the stadium. I've managed to get most of the roof in shot and most of the seating around me apart from what's behind me. So really pleased with this shot. And I appreciate not everyone likes this type of thing. They prefer to just take a single standard shot with the wide angle lens that they have. I've got the 15mm. This was taken 15mm sequential shots to create this super wide. And it's a bit kind of warpy and distorted, but it just gives you that full appreciation of the sheer size and scale of the stadium that we're working in. So I'm just going to run through the process and the technique of doing this. So I'm just going to adjust some of the settings on the camera. I'm normally shooting at f11 or f8, so I'm going to go with f8 for this one. I'm going to bring the shutter speed down to something that's still going to give me a sharp, clean image. So I'm going to go for about 1/250th of a second. At the moment, it's giving me sort of ISO around sort of 200 to 250. I'm simply going to move the camera into portrait mode and take a series of sequential photographs, one after another, and making sure that they actually overlap. So normally a 50% overlap, just to allow the software to be able to stitch those images together. And I'm also going to just go around and take a few kind of standard photographs at 15mm, which is the widest that lens can go. This is all being done handheld with the image stabilization system turned on. And when it comes to focusing, I'm generally trying to find a midway point between the foreground and the background. So I'm generally normally focusing on the pitch, or on the pitch but a little bit closer towards me, because I'm shooting at kind of f8 or maybe even f11, so it's got a very deep depth of field. So I'm now going to bring all of these files into Camera RAW, and this includes a lot of the kind of standard shots that I took, and I'm just going to go through them gradually, and I'm just going to delete the ones that I don't need, because a lot of them are very similar, so I don't actually need all of these files. Okay, so now we get to the portrait orientation, and you can see that I'm just going to scan through, because I shoot in burst mode. Some of these photographs are kind of duplicated, so I just want to get rid of images that are the same. You only need a 50% overlap with those portrait images. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of those portrait photographs, and I'm just going to right click and I'm going to select merge to panorama. And this is the end result. And great thing is I've got this boundary warp slider, which I'm going to push to 100. I'm going to apply the auto settings. I'm going to see what cylindrical looks like. It looks really distorted and warped, but I'm generally happy with spherical with the boundary warp at 100. So I'm going to merge that down, just going to save it in my folder that I've pre-prepared, and now I have a DNG file. So I can now go back and I can actually just delete all of these sort of portrait files. I just don't need them anymore. So I can just delete them. So I'm just going to run this process again, and because I actually shot 2 panoramics while I was in the stadium, so we're going to run this process again with the other panoramic that I shot, just to have a look and see how that appears. So you can see here, let's move the boundary warp slider to 100. Probably not quite as good as the other one. More to do with my position in the stadium. Because I wasn't quite right in the corner, I've ended up with a lot more of the right-hand side as opposed to the left-hand side. So I think the first one that was produced was a lot more effective, and it's purely because of my positioning in the stadium as opposed to this particular shot where I've just got more of the right-hand side. So, I mean, I'll still use it, but your initial positioning in the stadium is really important. You kind of have to position yourself right in the corner to be able to get a really, really nice panoramic. So I'm just going to apply some edits to this image. I'm just going to crop in slightly. I got so much of the stadium in shot. I'm just going to do a bit of cropping. I'm just going to pull some of that right hand side in a little bit because we don't need to see so much of that. And just going to straighten the image up a little bit, and I'm just going to adjust some of the blacks and also reduce some of the shadows and just bring some of the whites and the highlights down. Just trying to get a good balance between the whites and blacks. And I think overall, it's not a bad image. Of course, this time of the day, a lot of the time, the stadium is casting a shadow over the pitch, and which is not amazing. But the great thing about having such a wide dynamic range shooting RAW is that we're able to adjust the whites and the blacks and then bring down some of the shadows and do this sort of post-production editing. I'm just going to go back to the first panoramic shot that I took, and I'm just going to make a few adjustments again, cropping in. So just trying to get the pitch slightly more central. The nice thing about this image is the shadow on the pitch isn't quite as profound as the other panoramic image, and I'm able to really tone down some of the whites here as well and get a slightly nicer balance between whites and blacks. So I'm just going to adjust some of the shadows here and maybe just beef up the saturation a little bit, and just a few more minor adjustments here, just trying to get the balance right. I want to have the image as kind of bright as possible, but at the same time I want it to look, you know, natural as well. Okay, so I think we're happy with that. So I'm just going to save these images down into the folder that I pre-prepared. So I'm now saving from a DNG, which is a RAW file, down to a JPEG. So if I want to make any further edits, I'm able to revert back to the DNG file. So that's my master file. So from that, I'm able to save a JPEG. So here I'm just going to show you a quick comparison between these, the shot of the standard 15mm field of view to that of the panoramic field. And as you can see, I'm just getting so much more of that roof in, getting more of the stand, more of the seating. It just gives you another perspective and another sort of interesting field of view. It gives you a greater appreciation of the stadium. It just allows you to shoot and have more of your surroundings in shot. So the reason why I like that type of photography, it's not for everyone. It's, you know, a lot of people look at it and go, oh, it's a bit warpy and a bit distorted, but we're just trying to create something that's a little bit unusual and a little bit different, and it's obviously a lot more work. Personally, I don't think it takes that much time to produce these images, and I think the end results are probably worth it. Thanks so much for watching. Please give it a like, give it a share, and subscribe for more videos.